20 years, I've been doing program evaluation here along the border and occasionally programs in Mexico. So today's topic is program evaluation. And yesterday we did program development. And after my experience in assisting developing programs and evaluating programs at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level, programs not only in education, but in social services. What I'm going to try to do today is give you some very general ideas of the social science methodologies, but more importantly about the practical aspects of program evaluation. So program evaluation is applicable to all social service and educational programs. And that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on more on education, but it's appropriate to all types of social programming. So we evaluate all the time. When you go to the market and you look at tomatoes and you kind of grab a tomato and look at it and you go, I don't want that one. You pick up another one and look at that, and maybe you don't want that one either. Then you see the third one and you take that. That's an evaluation. So when you buy a car, hopefully, or a major appliance, a television, a washing machine, a house, you evaluate and you try to distinguish between two different items to determine which one is better. In program evaluation, we're doing a similar type of thing, but we're more focused on the program that we're evaluating and trying to determine if that program has completed or fulfilled the goals and objectives. So the simplest way that I describe it to the different teams that I've worked with is in social science research, if you see a program manager in the team doing something wrong that will not cause harm to the participants, you will not intervene. That's the rule. You don't intervene. But in program evaluation, you immediately feed back that information, or you give that information to the manager and or the staff. But you're using the same type of methodologies in evaluation that you're using in research. So this is the very important distinction, is that with research, the program runs. When it's done, you write up a report on it, and that report is based on the entire program and what you've observed or tested. But in evaluation, you're part of the program team. In an external evaluation, you don't work. So I've done external evaluations for the University of Nevada and the University of Arizona and Western New Mexico. And when you do those types of evaluations, you're not formally a part of a team, but you meet with the team. You're just external to the team. And the best type of evaluation is an external evaluation. Somebody who functions as part of the team, and yet they're not really on the payroll of the organization that they're evaluating. So they're independent. And what evaluation is, it's the formal and systematic process. You can read it on the slide, for collecting, analyzing, interpreting data. And that's where it shares its similarity with social science research, psychology, education, sociology, anthropology, these types of, what we call in the United States, social sciences, have common methodologies. So you don't, there is, because education is such a big field, In the United States, we teach educational research, but the methods that you learn in educational research are applicable across the board. So someone that does sociology is totally familiar with the types of research methods that we would use in education. So that formal process is based on social science research methods. So we don't make up the methods when we evaluate a program. In order for our evaluation to have validity, we use standard research methodologies. And as I said, it's the application of social science research methodologies in the design, in the implementation, and we do that to judge the effectiveness of educational programs. And what evaluation does is it determines if a program is meeting the need that was identified. Yesterday we talked about needs assessments. So that's the first thing it does. The second thing, it makes sure that the services that are being delivered are being delivered according to the plan of the program. In education, it might be the curriculum. And that the educational program actually produces a benefit. So you don't want to implement an educational program and when you do your measurements, find out that there was no improvement, that nothing changed. And that happens from time to time. So there's questions and answers that evaluation is designed for. And you want to make sure that the program is implemented according to the design. This is very important. Often, because of administrative or staff issues, a program is not implemented in complete accordance with its design. And even though it's in education, it rarely happens, especially in K through 12. But it's important to tell you that evaluation, you want to make sure that it's serving the targeted population. Although that applies more to social services, it does have some minor application in education. And then lastly, and perhaps most importantly, has the program met its goals and objectives? Yesterday, I talked about the importance of setting meaningful and measurable goals and objectives. And it's very easy in the program design phase for a team to get carried away with what they think they can do. And they set goals and objectives that are beyond what the program will be able to deliver. And so I always tell my clients and the teams that I work on, if you think you're going to make a 20% improvement in quality X, then you want to say you're going to make a 15% or maybe a 10% improvement, because it looks better if you exceed your goals and objectives than if you don't meet it. So if you set a 20% goal and you get 15, you missed your goals and objectives, and I'm going to have to say that in the report. If you set your goal at say 12%, and you make 16%, I'll say, well, they exceeded their goal. And from a practical standpoint, we know that as humans, it looks better when you exceed your goals than when you don't meet them. And the purpose of evaluation, at least as it's practiced in the United States, is to provide funding agencies, the government, or a foundation with information on why the goals and objectives of a program were met or were not met. So what we're trying to do as evaluators, not only say they didn't meet the goal or they met the goal or they exceeded the goal, we're also trying to help the program and the funders realize why that happened. because the why is as important as if the goals were met or not met. So the basics of evaluation. So when you're planning an evaluation, you want to know what the goals and objectives are. You have to set those. You have to determine what the data sources are. Yesterday, I spoke about implementing a curriculum. So a program development team on, for example, developing a STEM curriculum would not just be interested in measuring student outcome from the curriculum. Prior to designing the curriculum, they want to make sure that the curriculum is designed with the abilities and knowledge of the instructional staff that will be delivering the curriculum. They want to make sure that there's no administrative issues that's going to inhibit or retard the ability of a school to deliver the curriculum. Let's take an example. And this is the United States, which, as most of you know, is one of the most developed nations in the world. So I'm going to make a little digression to give you an example of this. I evaluated a program that was delivered on the Dene Native American reservation. The Dene people are commonly known as Navajo. They have the largest reservation in the United States. That's the largest indigenous community in the United States. And what we were evaluating was a distance learning model being delivered by the Northern Arizona University. And the program manager was experiencing a lot of problems with the students, who were all licensed teachers, not getting their homework done on time. And she said, "What do you think we should do?" And I said, "Well, let's do a focus group. If you've got money in the budget, you know, because they all would have to come into town. We have to pay for their hotel and their gas and everything. If you've got money in the budget, let's do focus groups." We came in. They didn't have internet access. They had to drive up on top of a hill to get internet access. Nobody had internet access in their home. This was, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago. Probably they've got it now. So, you know, when you're looking at data sources and data collection plans, you have to make sure that there's no other issues that could affect your collection of data, your dissemination of the curriculum. So if you've got a program that's going to be done online, you want to make sure that everybody's got really good online services. So you also need to think about the analysis plan. In other words, we're going to collect all this data. What are we going to do with it? And another thing that I'd like to point out that I've seen many times in my practice, and that's that oftentimes, if you don't have a evaluation team on the program, you'll collect data that you don't need or that you can't use, and you won't collect data that you need. And I've seen this many times. So you want to make sure that when you talk about your data sources, your data collection plan, and your analysis plan, that is very well thought out so that the data that you need is going to be there. Because remember, when you're doing program evaluation on, for example, a curriculum implementation, it's going across a lot of domains. It's not just focused on the actual curriculum. Although it's possible that in fact you won't need to collect data on the educational or the instructional staff or the administrative staff, but that should be discussed just in case. And then the most important aspect, of course, is reporting, because if you do all of the above and you don't plan for the reporting, then you just have a lot of data in a spreadsheet or a database someplace that doesn't help anybody. So when you're designing an evaluation, the evaluation plan, and that's where the evaluators don't set the goals and objectives, but they help the program team set up goals and objectives that you're going to be able to collect data to measure those goals and objectives. Then you have to select the design, and design is, a pre-test, post-test, and education that's often used. You're going to pre-test the students and post-test the students. But if you're implementing a new curriculum that has information or knowledge that may not have been emphasized in the teacher training portion of a teacher's career, then you have to make sure that you have that you measure the teacher's ability to deliver that curriculum. And probably in Kazakhstan, you probably have maybe even better math instruction than we do here. I mean, I've participated in a program to increase instructors' math knowledge, which was eye-opening. But I'm not sure what you have there. But let's just say that it's the same as in the United States. The issue would be to make sure, still, if you don't want to measure across the entire program, you choose a sample of schools and measure those schools. So let's say, I don't know, you have 1,000 schools in Kazakhstan that you want to implement this STEM curriculum in. You do a sample, a statistical sample on rural and urban and the different aspects. I know there's a lot of ethnic groups in Kazakhstan. You'd want to do what we call a stratified sample. But you could do a sample and determine if the instructional staff is able to deliver that curriculum. So you wouldn't have to measure everything. But that's what you do when you're designing an evaluation. You're looking at the strategy. You're looking at the evaluation questions. You're looking at the measurement approach. And you're looking at ways to design an evaluation that has generalizability, which means it's applicable across the board. Then it's also important to develop the data requirements. In other words, what kind of data are we going to need in order to evaluate this program? And some of those will be based on the goals and objectives, but other will be based on data that may impact the outcome of the program. And again, in a curriculum, it would obviously be teacher prep, whether the technical facilities are available. So if you have an online curriculum and a school doesn't have, dependable online services, you've got an issue right there. And this is something I'm sure that you're all familiar with, but I want to emphasize it because it's a very, very important part of program evaluation. It not only helps the delivery of the program, in other words, the program managers and the program staff, it also helps the evaluators. Because we're all human and we make mistakes, I think Shakespeare said to err is human. So you want to do a pilot study. This is what we call it. We call it a pilot study. And what that is you choose some locations and you implement the program in its totality. So for example, if you wanted to do a STEM pilot program, you'd have to have the entire curriculum developed. You'd have to assess the teachers. You do the entire program. And you'd run it at a couple locations. And you'd monitor that program, the pilot, very, very closely. Because what you're going to find out is the difference between a plan and the implementation is great. And there's so many unknown factors that a team is not going to be able to understand. That program I talked about up in northern Arizona, when they wrote the program, they just assumed that they had good internet connection on the reservation. At that time, they didn't. I think now they do, but at that time they didn't. So what a pilot study, they didn't do a pilot study. If they would have done a pilot study, they would have realized that there was a big issue with the actual delivery of the curriculum. So what a pilot study does, as you can see on the slide, is it confirms that the procedures and the methods of the program, you do that before you implement the program. For example, in Kazakhstan, nationally, you check it in a few sites. And a pilot study, to further define it, it's a small scale preliminary investigation that replicates the actual program. So it's really essential and important to understand that pilot studies are the complete program. In other words, they're not an abbreviated program. They're not portions of the program. You have to do the entire program exactly as you would implement it. It has to be completely implemented according to the plan. And if it's done that way, then you're going to be able to identify unanticipated problems or issues. So I'm focusing a lot on pilot studies because to do 1 hour seminars on evaluation would probably take 10 minimum to really acquaint somebody with all of the issues in program evaluation. And so I'm focusing on pilot studies because it's a way to look at an evaluation program in miniature. You're not having to look at the entire implementation problems. You're being able to implement it on a very small scale. It's one thing if you've got to implement a project in a state like Arizona. It's a big state. It's over 100,000 square miles, so it's one of the bigger states in the United States. There's a lot of areas in Arizona that are very rural and very primitive. So if you want to implement across a state, the team's going to be just driving all over to monitor it. So if you do, when you're doing the pilot study, for example, here, if any of you after the program is done, you want to do some Googling, you could Google like Gila Bend, which is a very small town where it's very, very hot. And you could do Flagstaff, which is a long ways away from Gila Bend. And then you could do Tucson or Phoenix. You could do 3 areas. So you'd have a rural, a kind of mid-size, and a large metropolitan area. And so when you're doing the pilot studies, you really want to test those procedures that you're going to use. It's very important that you develop procedures. The staff that's going to deliver the curriculum or the program has to be thoroughly familiar with the procedures. Usually you're going to have to create a procedures manual so that people thoroughly understand that there's a book they can go to, because teachers have their own lives too, and they have a lot of other issues that they have to deliver. So you want to make sure that the test procedures are tested in the pilot study, and that you update your procedures manual so that the people that ultimately deliver the program, when it's delivered nationwide or statewide, in my case, understand the procedures. One of the things, at least in the United States, is that there are agencies here that develop testing. And some of these are nonprofit, some of them are profit. And so their mission in life, as it were, is to develop standardized tests to make sure these tests have internal validity. And they do all of the development of the test. But oftentimes, and you probably have that capability within the Ministry of Education in Kazakhstan. But oftentimes, if you're implementing a curriculum that is significantly different from a prior curriculum, you're going to have to develop what we call instruments. and I know there's some translation difficulty. We call them instruments, a standardized test. So in the field, we wouldn't say we're gonna in our reports, we'd say the instrument was administered. We wouldn't say the test was administered. That's just a technical jargon. So what we call instruments in the educational area would either be standardized tests or surveys. And then you want to also make sure that the scoring routines and the analysis techniques have been tested in the pilot study. That way you make sure that you collected exactly the data you needed and that you analyzed it correctly. And so I just want to cover again what you might consider as standardized tests in other countries, we usually refer to as an instrument. I think in the news media in the United States, they would call it a standardized test, but among evaluators, we would call it instrument. So instrumentation refers to the range of data collection devices that you're going to use to evaluate a program. So an instrument is a singular data collection device, like a standardized test, like let's say a math test, a standardized math test, or a math test that was developed specifically to measure math ability, let's say in STEM, so the mathematics portion of it. So you have an individual test would be considered an instrument, and instrumentation would not only be the standardized test, again, speaking about, let's say, a math curriculum implementation, a new math implementation, curriculum implementation. The testing portion would be one instrument, but the measurement of teachers' ability to deliver the curriculum would be another instrument. It might not be a standardized test, although you might use a standardized test with the instructors as well. You might want to develop a survey for teachers and administrative staff, in other words, the school director and those who are going to supervise the implementation. You might want to do a survey instrument, especially in the pilot stage, to determine how any administrative and non-instructional delivery issues affected or impacted instruction delivery. So you'd want to, so you might develop a survey instrument for that and use a Likert scale questions and probably keep it small, have a database, feed that into the database, correlate that to the school so that you're able to say, okay, at this school, this is the scores that we had from the administrative staff on success or ability of their staff to implement, and we correlate that to student grades. And so all of a sudden you get a much more what we call robust, or in the sense of social science research, robust means strong. You can develop strong connections. Let's say, for example, so we're going to implement this new math, much more intricate or much more developed math curriculum that's going to accelerate the pace of children learning mathematics. Let's say that. So when we're doing that, and we look at all of the schools, where we create our database, the children are identified within the school. Probably you've already got that in Kazakhstan. So we've got these 20 children in a class being taught by this teacher. So one of the things that we'd want to know is, does the experience level of the teacher affect outcome? And we can't determine that if we don't know the experience level of the teacher. So we need to collect that piece of data, correlate it to those 20 students. But when you go across the nation, you'd be able to say, wow, for example, teachers with 5 years experience or more, their students did better on these tests. So that's why when you're looking at instrumentation, you're gonna develop not just one instrument to measure a program. Typically, there's going to be instrumentation. There's going to be multiple measuring devices to measure data from multiple sources in order to correlate that data to better understand the outcome. And data collection. So we've got our instruments. We know who they're going to be administered to. We know when they're going to be administered in terms of the program implementation. So you're going to collect the data on teacher experience level before you collect any data on the students. So there's a sequence. That sequence is developed during the planning. And important, I can't emphasize it enough, is especially the pilot study, you're going to begin to understand the problems associated with data collection. Now, one thing, and this may startle people, but the two organizations that are the most highly regimented, generally speaking, in human activities is the military and education. Think about it. 20, well, I don't know what the average is in Kazakhstan, but 20 to 30 students typically worldwide, although some countries have much higher, but typically 20 to 30 students worldwide for a teacher. So there you have your regimentation. And then usually attendance is kept. So you know how many students are in the class. So now you've already got a built-in correlation between these students, these 20 students, and this one teacher. Data analysis is a huge subject, and it's, you know, I mean, I've got one of these bookshelves full of just research manuals and textbooks, and so data analysis is a huge a field or area, and we could do 10 sessions on data analysis. Believe me, that's a big, I mean, if you really want to get down to the nuts and bolts. So I've got a PhD in educational policy and administration. I had to take all the statistics courses, all of the research development courses. I needed all that, but that wasn't enough. It's possible to be an evaluator with a master's degree, but it's very rare in the United States, at least in my experience. Most evaluators of big programs are PhD level, but that's only part of what you need. You really need to go out and do it. It's like teaching. You know, when you graduate with your teacher's degree, are you really ready to teach? Well, it's probably after 5 years, you're doing it a lot better. So data analysis is really important. And reporting is obvious. I'm only covering it because it's covered in all the textbooks on program evaluation, and it's one of the obvious functions. Is that once you've collected all the data, you've analyzed all the data, you need to report it. And as evaluators, we report it to the program funders. So if it's a federal program, we report it to the federal government. If it's state. In education, my specialty is longitudinal studies. And a longitudinal study is often used in education. It's one of the most important tools in educational research. It simply means you follow a cohort. So you take the first graders that are entering school this year and you'd follow them through the 12th grade. It's done all the time in education. It's a standard. There's 3 types of evaluation, and we've got a little over 5 minutes left before we go to questions. And so there's 3 types. There's actually, in the literature, you'll find more, but the 3 types that I see are important in educational research or evaluation are fidelity. In other words, you've got a team that develops a curriculum. They write a teacher manual. In their curriculum, they say, you know, here's lesson A, B, C, D. Well, in Russian, it's, hang on, from A to whatever. So you've got, in English, it's A to Z. And I guess the translator's taking care of that. And each step you do is step A, step B. What you'll find out is that oftentimes, because of situations in the classroom, or maybe a teacher doesn't agree with the sequence that you've got, we call it scope and sequence, that teachers will not be on scope or on sequence. And that's fidelity. An evaluator goes out to make sure in classroom observation that the class is being conducted according to the procedure. We have process, and process is to determine if you're meeting the target audience, which usually in education is automatic. And outcome evaluation is, did you meet the goals and objectives? So again, fidelity is to make sure that the program is following the policies, that we observe the staff to make sure they follow the protocols. That is, in some ways, the most simple, and in some ways, the most complicated. It's once you've got your goals and objectives designed, it's easy to say, this is what we're going to measure. Oftentimes, measuring it is very difficult. And in the end, sometimes programs don't show that they were effective. But that's how you measure program effectiveness. And from an evaluation standpoint, the most important aspect of development of outcome evaluation is questions and other ancillary or related components, is that the goals and objectives have to be properly developed. That's the most important thing. You've got to make sure that when you sit around the table and you develop your goals and objectives, that they're measurable and attainable. So, spasiba. And if any of you are interested in carrying on the conversation, I would be more than happy to do that. We can do it by, email. I mean, if you want, you could call me. We could do a Zoom meeting. If there's anything in this presentation that you'd like to further explore, or you want to comment on, or you want to criticize, or whatever, as we say, that's cool.
Можете ли вы посоветовать какие-то метрики, по которым можно судить, нужно ли было эту программу вводить или не нужно? И вообще, как эффективность оценить?
I'd be, from the top of my head, without examining it, what I can say is that from a political standpoint in this country, often measurement is not done because political forces don't want measurement. They want to implement a program, and just to say they implemented it. I'm not saying that's the case here, but I'd be happy if you'd like me to do that. I'd be happy to engage in a conversation with the person who asked this question. Many of you don't know, but my wife is Kazakh, and she was born in Karagunda. So I call her the Karagunda cutie. I don't know if that can be translated. But as all you Kazakhs know, Kazakh women are the most beautiful in the world. I have to say that. But I would be more than happy to have a further discussion on that issue, and if I could take a look at some of the materials. But generally speaking, it's very hard to do evaluation after the fact. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. But it's more difficult, obviously, to come in if no evaluation instruments have been developed and evaluate. But as I said, I'd be more than happy. You can contact me directly, or you can contact me through Almas, And I'd be happy to take a look and engage in a conversation for as long as it takes to answer the question. Okay.